welcome back, everybody, to this latest podcast. And I have a really special guest on today, Kevin Whelan. I've known Kevin for a number of years. And he's one of the UK's leading experts and authorities on wealth building. And he's also the founder of Wealth Builders, which helps you create multiple streams of recurring income for financial independence. So welcome, Kevin, to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, and thanks for the invitation. It almost feels like a chat with an old friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have so many things in common. And actually, interestingly, I was just making a list of some of the things that we regularly talk about and we seem to have in common, because you also have a podcast which is called Wealth Talk, which, by the way, is a really excellent podcast. So if you haven't got onto that yet, really, really worth checking that one out. And so, yeah, there's lots of interesting topics you talk about there. And I just put together a list of 4 things that we talk about a lot. We seem to share in terms of our interests and what we have in common. So number 1, we both really care about guiding and educating people to become financially secure and independent. And that's not something that any of us ever learn at school, right? So, or as adults, right? And that's why it's so important that I think we both do that. Number 2, we believe nobody will ever manage your money and your future better than yourself. Number 3, we show that there are really fantastic tools out there for people to take control of their own financial path. And Kevin, I know one of your areas of expertise is SAS Pensions, which we'll come on to, and that's a really great tool to take control of your own financial path. And finally, and I talk about this a lot, and I know Kevin agrees with it, and that's the importance of being aware and cutting your fits. So the fits being your fees, inflation, and taxes. So those are the sort of things I came up with. I'm sure there's loads more, Kevin, and we don't agree on everything all the time.
But that's fine, isn't it? It's good whenever you're talking to a fellow professional to have a slightly different view on some things, because that can polarize and help an audience determine who do they resonate with on a particular point. And I think, but fundamentally, the principles are the same. I would echo the points that you've made wholeheartedly. And for the reason, though, and we touched on it slightly just off air as we were saying hi to each other, that so many people drift in life. The world and the tyranny of their daily routine takes them over, and they don't always take action, even though they hear it on a podcast or they read it in a magazine or online, but they don't take the action. So I think surrounding yourself with good people, not just listening, not just reading or watching, but actually taking action is the key. So if we can leave your audience today with 1 or 2 small things, don't have to be massive things, and they take that action, then momentum is always better than meditation, in my view.
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. And I find the same. So when I talk to investors, it's such a good point, because it's not that people don't want to take action. Some people don't have the confidence, and what drives that confidence is not necessarily having that knowledge or that sort of guiding light to help you in the direction that you should be going in. And really, what happens when people don't have that knowledge, they tend to do what is the easiest thing, which is to do nothing. That's the default action, to do nothing. And really, that's a dangerous place to be in if you're thinking about your financial future and wanting to secure that. Doing nothing is the worst thing sometimes you could be doing. And sometimes I say to my investors, sometimes that's even worse than doing what might possibly be considered to be the wrong thing. So yeah, and inaction is a dangerous thing. So I totally agree with that. So Kevin, you're a big fan of pensions, and that falls into the T within the FIPS, and the T is saving taxes, and not only saving taxes, pensions are actually a way to actually earn money from the taxman. And your niche within pensions is SAS Pensions. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with what SAS pensions are, what are they, Kevin, and how do they differ from a regular pension? So we're talking about a company pension or a SIP.
Well, I suppose I'll start there and work backwards, if you don't mind. That almost everybody in the UK is relying to a greater or lesser degree on the value of their pension at some point in the future. Now, there are some pensions that have a value as in there's a pot of money that they're having to manage and take the risk on over the course of their life. So when you have money in a pot, money purchase, that's the kind of language. So you know you've got that because you're getting a statement. And the big thing as far as the pots are concerned is it's so important to understand, as you said earlier on, the fees, the charges associated with that, the whether you're actively or passively getting involved in that. But that's something for another concept. But the SAS pension is a money purchase pension, a small self-administered scheme. The language is very clunky, but the benefits are not. The SAS is only for limited company owners. It's a business pension. It's a bit like turning your pension into a business, so it reflects who you are. And just as a business is set up legally, so a SAS is. It's a small scheme for a small business and a small family. Maximum number of people 11, which is interesting. I don't know why it came about as being 11. 1973 is when they were started. But every other pension pretty much is a single person scheme. Whereas what I love about SAS is it gives people the opportunity, particularly families, small businesses, husbands and wives, grown-up kids, to pool and collaborate their money and see it as a worthwhile enterprise, a tax-free trust fund for their family, which means they have to get involved to make it grow. Because as you said, again, I'm finding myself agreeing with you too much. I don't know. We normally like to have a disagreement, don't we? But the fact that nobody's going to take care of your money more than you. And what SAS does, it allows that discussion to take place. A bit like in a business, you would do that. You'd have shareholders and directors and you'd have a conversation. So it is with SAS, but the benefit of SAS and the unique points about SAS, other than the collaboration, so it's not a pot for one, it's a multiple pot. Yes, you mentioned it, you can get corporation tax relief. So all companies pay taxes, as long as they're making profit, of course. And if you're making profit, you're going to pay 25% corporation tax, typically. Well, if you can claim that money back and basically use taxed money to be able to build a pot that you can invest in whatever you want to invest in, whether it's the stock market, which I know is your passion, whether it's property, whether it's lending to your own company, whatever you want to do, whether it's gold, whether it's crypto, you've got so much freedom to be who you want to be, to have your own investor DNA reflected in what it is you want to do. So while the language, as I said, is a bit strange, who would invent a term that said small self-administered scheme? The language is just crazy. But the small basically then is the small family, small business. Scheme is another word for pension. That's just a legal term. And self-administered is a bit of a misnomer. It really should, if I was renaming it, I'd call it the director's pension or the small self-directed pension, because you direct it. You don't have to administer it. There are administrators who do administration and bookkeeping and compliance, because all pensions have got to be held separately from your own personal life. And as we'll discuss, I'm sure, inheritance tax, there has to be a professional to deal with the inheritance position, to deal with tax-free cash. So all the other rules as far as inheritance and tax-free cash, they apply to all pensions. The real value of SAS then, the collaboration, the wide scope of investing. And one other point which I will make, which is very powerful, which is the only pension that it can actually lend you money and become or be a bank to yourself. So if you've got a pension pot, imagine you collaborate, and you've got a husband and wife, say, in very simple terms, with £200,000 each in their pension, now got a pot of 400. Now, if they've got a business or a property business, they could lend 200, half of the 400, to their own company to go and do what they want to do, which means they're building their wealth with their pension money today. They're not putting the money in a bucket and saying, do not disturb till I'm 65 and let's hope for the best. They're using that money today and they're building their wealth today with pension money that they didn't realize was possible. So I hope I've done it justice in a limited way to talk about the real power and the benefit. And there's one other we'll get to when we talk about inheritance tax, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's really useful, Kevin, because it's not a pension that the wider public knows about. And really, as you mentioned, it's really for business owners and it's a director's pension, which is why it's not in the mainstream. But I think you really summarized it well. So if I was to repeat back the main points, it's still a wrapper, just like the other
Yeah.
pension schemes we mentioned. So you still get the amazing tax benefits. I call it free money because if you're contributing into your pension, that is thousands and thousands of free money, which is given to you as a rebate from the tax man, which would just compound up in the usual way, but just in a tax-free way. But you also have a lot more flexibility with this, so you can invest your money into various different asset classes and you can get your family involved. And the other really interesting thing, which some of our listeners may not be aware of, is that you can actually draw down, or not draw down, sorry, that's probably not the correct term, but you can access some of
Hmm.
this capital before you turn 55 or 65 or whatever is your retirement age.
Immediately, really. So if you're
Mm,
35, you can access to 35. It's not just early access, it's immediate access.
mm,
So yeah, the I think you reflected the benefits well, and it only applies to business owners. But what we're finding, certainly in our wealth builder community, as people build their multiple streams of recurring income with our guidance, increasingly they're building it in property, in business, in intellectual property, and in joint ventures and collaborations, which brings out their entrepreneurial spirit. And as a result of that, many of them, even if they weren't limited company owners, become limited company owners in the future because they see their whole family as a wealth building business and a legacy plan that of itself has got merit. It's almost like creating like a family office like they have in America. You got this idea of the family wealth will perpetuate to the next generation and the next generation. And building streams of income gives you the certainty to be able to do that and to feel confident that no matter what budgets or politics throw at you, you're going to be financially set for life. And then you can set your kids for life too. And
mm,
in a world where children are living longer and longer, typical age that people will live now for younger people, my grandkids, for example, they'll live to 100 years. If you can live 100 years of age and you've got all the risk yourself in your traditional pension, boy, you've got to know exactly what you're doing because you've
mm,
got a tough job trying to eke money that you've saved out of a job, say, typically, and try and turn that into something that will support and sustain you for your lifetime from 60 something or 70 something to 100 crumbs. That's an immense job, and why
mm,
your good teachings of how to keep your fees down investing, how to look at passive investing as opposed to active investing, how to get involved in options and so on, in many ways that the stock market can bring value in a way that most people just simply delegate that money to a third party. And that delegation very quickly turns into abdication as they forget what they've got. And that's evidenced by the size of the pot. That's 27 billion. That's bigger than the whole in the economy at the moment, uh, in lost pensions. People have got a pension that they lost, they've forgotten. And that's a huge amount of money, Manish, that's just simply drifting in the sea that in the end, if it's not claimed, in the end will go to the revenue, you know,
mm,
to the coffers
mm,
of revenue. So I encourage everybody
mm,
who's got a pension to at least start to keep track over that. And if you are not sure whether you've had something that's been lost, it's been forgotten, the company's gone bust, or an insurance company changed the name, there's a tracing agency in Newcastle, a government tracing agency, a .gov site that will help people get a little bit clearer on that. So yeah,
uh,
that's one thing. If you're going to do something in 25, get a sense of where your pensions are, and that's going to be needed massively because if the changes come in 27, which is about inheritance tax, and we definitely should talk about that,
mm,
it's going to be more important. You've kept track of your pensions because the tax has to be paid. And if you've got an inheritance tax bill that needs to be paid out of your pension, it's the trustee or the administrator's got to pay it. And if they have to pay it, you've got four, five, six pensions, you're going to be paying so much in fees
Mm.
to cover that. So I would suggest people start to think about, if you've got pensions, understand them, simplify them wherever you can, and then keep track of what you're doing. And if you've got a limited company, take a look at SAS and see if that might be a good fit for you.
Yeah, yeah, amazing advice. That could be worth tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, just that bit alone, actually. So really do take advice from what Kevin has just told us. And you mentioned options earlier, Kevin, and yeah, look, I find the same. So I teach people how to invest in options, and people are getting very high levels of monthly recurring income on options. And I often get asked, well, how can I take this in a tax efficient way? And you can't do that in an ISA. So you can't do options in an ISA. And pensions are a great way. I have a lot of investors who are doing options, earning good levels of income in their pensions in a tax-free wrapper. So
Mhm.
SAS is another great way to enjoy that without paying tax. There are some SIP providers out there who allow you to do that, but you don't get the same flexibility, and they're not actually very good. The SAS is a great way to be doing options, actually. So yeah, no, that's great advice. So you talked earlier about inheritance tax and the recent budget we've just had. Maybe dropped a bit of a bombshell. I don't know. You might have some views on this. And some people were freaking out because now pensions potentially come under inheritance tax liability because they fall into your pension into your estate when inherited.
Yeah.
So, what can you tell us about that? Should people be panicking? What should people be doing about this new change of policy?
Well, I never recommend anybody would panic over anything. We saw it though. We saw hundreds of thousands of people taking out their tax-free cash in the run up to the budget because they thought the government might somehow put the kibosh on that. And then some of them have thought they had a 30-day cooling off notice. So they'd put the request for the cash in, they'd wait the 30 days, and then don't take it out if the government didn't change it. And the revenue said, no, there's no cooling off period. If you requested your tax-free cash, you're getting it. So a lot of people caught up because they panicked. So never ever a need ever to panic. There's always plenty of time to take stock. And with pensions, we've got 2 years anyway. So the rules won't come in till 27, but I don't think it's going to be a change of rule that we're hoping for. It's just really going to be, how will it work? What will be the process? Now, yes, I think it was a bombshell. And no, I didn't predict it. I was completely knocked sideways when they said, despite the fact you may have been planning your pension for years and years, and part of your thought was to build a pot where you could support yourself, but whatever you hadn't spent would be left to the next generation free of inheritance tax. That was always a good thing. It was a real bonus of pensions, a bigger bonus than just the free money, as you call it, and the tax-free returns. But now the inheritance tax comes in, it means if you die and you got your money in a pot, and whatever's left is going to be added to your estate for the purposes of inheritance tax. Now, no reason to panic because you've got, generally speaking, unless you've got a very short life expectancy, you've got time to plan these things. Now, one of the things that you can certainly do, I mentioned two, I think. One is with SAS, for example, because it's a family trust fund and you can invite your grown-up children from age 18 into the scheme, you've got a double option inside a SAS. One, you can make contributions for your children, take the tax relief instead of paying it into your account, pay it to their account, which means you're bypassing inheritance tax altogether because you're building their pot, not building your pot to pass on, you're building their pot. But two, in SAS, you can earmark. It means you can cascade money to the next generation by saying, hey, in the group scheme, because there are many members of the scheme, one, the older person, can take the lower returning assets and the higher returning assets can go to the younger people. So you can almost start to nudge and over a long-term plan can create a reduction on the impact of inheritance tax. But the biggest one of all, which is never ever talked about, Manish, and so few people have even heard of it. I'll mention this one. It's called gifts out of income. So everybody who studies inheritance tax knows that you can make small gifts to your children and to grandchildren and weddings and things like that. But it's so tiny, it's not even really worth discussing as a plan. But two things to point out there. One is the 325,000, what's called the nil rate band, or the amount of money anybody can leave tax free to the spouse or next generation. Bearing in mind, there's never inheritance tax payable to a spouse. A lot of people might be thinking about getting married, actually, because there is inheritance tax to pay to non-spouses. But anyway, but that's a revolving 325. Every 7 years, you can build up 325, click, but do another 325, do another 325. So it's got a revolving every 7 years there. But the best one for me, and certainly suits my wealth builder students and clients, is gifts out of income. So if you can prove, which is why I believe in recurring income, not value, because recurring income you can measure and you can count. Value is always going to be up and down, and you've got to convert it into income at some point anyway. So if you've got a high level of recurring income from property or from your pension or from your business or wherever you get it from, and you can prove that the level of income that you have is surplus to the requirements of your life. So if you can show that you need, I'll pick a number, if you can live on £5,000 a month or 60 grand a year, and your recurring income is 100 grand a year, you can give away the 40 grand a year, and there's no limit, and there's no tax, and there's no 7-year rule, because you've demonstrated completely that you do not need that money, and it's called a gift out of income.
Wow.
So the planning opportunities, which is why your point about panicking is never ever about anything panic. Just see something, realize you might want to dig deeper into it, and then ask a question and find people around you with whom you resonate with their message and how they convey that message, and then take some guidance and, if necessary, take professional paid for advice, and then make the right decision, not a knee-jerk decision based on something you heard from somebody down the pub or somebody in the, somebody somewhere who doesn't really have the necessary expertise guaranteed that would be able to help you understand what you need to understand.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I didn't hear any headlines talking about that nugget, gift out of income. That's a huge thing. So let me just get this right. So it's called gift out of income,
Mhm.
and there are no limits, there are no monetary limits on this, there are no 7-year limits on this, and you can do it and you can gift that to members of your family or anyone you want to.
Anyone you want. Yeah.
Okay. And this is nothing to do with your pension or anything
Oh,
like that. It's for anybody outside of
anybody.
their
Yeah.
pension.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So that's definitely something we need to be talking to our accountants about. I guess the challenge is demonstrating how
You're
much you
right.
can do, right?
It's all about the documentation, and of course, there's always a fine line to walk, isn't there, between building your wealth and protecting your wealth and passing on a legacy. Because when you're young, you're still building wealth, so you're not really needing to think about the inheritance tax. When you're older, and more often than not, people get too old, the silent generation. I've got a mum that's living, and I'm sure other people do, in their 80s and 90s and whatever, and they've stopped talking about money. They've stopped thinking about planning. They're just drifting into an inheritance tax bill that nobody can do anything about. And that's leaving it too late. And
Mhm.
so the right time is always going to be unique to you. Now, if, for example, in Wealth Builders, we believe that almost anyone, and we use the same principles as you've got to have the right finance. We talk about fit as well, but the right level of finance, the right clear level of interest, and the right amount of time. Now, if you can get someone to a place where They've got some money or know where they can save money or make money. They've got an area of interest that really gives them energy, doesn't make them feel bored, doesn't make them feel negative, and they can put some time into it. Anybody could start to build recurring income streams immediately and be financially independent within 5 to 7 years. So if you've got somebody who's 40, they should be able to be completely financially independent somewhere around the 47, 48 mark. Now, once you're financially independent and you know that, that's never going to change because you're always building that recurring income. Might be affected a little bit, but the momentum just keeps growing because if you're not spending all the income, you're reinvesting. So the pot keeps growing and the recurring income keeps growing. So you could start then maybe at 50 to start thinking about the plan, the legacy plan for the next generation. So the sooner you can have a plan to be independent, the sooner you can start to really work out the plan to leave a tax-free legacy to the next generation. But the additional point I would make, I mentioned that younger people today will probably live to 100, is that they need knowledge to go with that. The reason why the 90-year-olds pay the tax or their estate pays the tax is they never had the knowledge, they never had the interest. And the reason why the next generation, generally speaking, will be poorer than the one that I'm in is because there's no knowledge transfer. So to me, it's just as important, not just to transfer money, but to transfer knowledge. So the more that your students and my students can take an active interest in managing their own life and managing their own wealth, the more they're able to pass that on to the next generation. So we see ourselves as stewards and our money passes on together with the knowledge that accumulated that money, but also the wisdom to pass that knowledge on to the generations yet to come. So to me, this is a holistic thing. It's not about panicking into one knee-jerk thing or another. It's about having an overall long-term plan, which is about families' wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are such good points because just touching upon what you said about attaining financial freedom, and it's really about building an asset base and letting your assets earn your income for you rather than
Right.
you. And then you are free to then go and do the things that you really enjoy in life, right? And that there could be nothing better. And for me, I love doing what I do, but I want to have the choice of being able to do it when I want and from where I want. And the whole concept of financial freedom is not just financial freedom, but the freedom to be where you want and do what you want as long as you want, right? And that's the key thing. And everything you're talking about here, being educated, knowing how to do these things. And some of these things aren't actually very complex. It's just people haven't been conditioned to be aware of these things. And I often say to my investors, look, all of us, even myself, who's got a background in finance and investing, as you do, Kevin, none of us were ever taught at school how to manage our own finances, right? The whole point of school was to get you through to the next step, pass your exams, get onto the corporate ladder. So you're always conditioned to serve society, either passing your exams, serving the corporate world, and doing what's right for the economy and doing right for what's right for the corporate world. You're never, and that's why we are never taught how to invest our money, right? And so what you've just said is super important because if you can learn this stuff and pass it down the generations, because we know that society has no interest or governments have no interest in teaching us how to invest because that would be against, the way the economy works, right? Who would work for a living if you could let your investments do all your hard work for you? So really important considerations, I think, there. You touched earlier about sort of pensions and consolidating your pensions. Well, why is that important, Kevin? Why is it important to, know where your pensions are? That's obvious. But why is it important to consolidate your pensions? And is it for control purposes or for sort of economic benefits? What is it that about consolidating your pensions?
The point I made before is there is so much money that's lost in the pension ether. And the more disconnected you become to pensions and the more you see them as small individual fragmented pots rather than the total value of all of them combined, the more likely it is you'll put off dealing with it. Because there'll be a few thousand here and a few thousand there and a few thousand here. And oh, yeah, I was only there 2 years. People make those sorts of assumptions all of the time. And what I'm saying is the principle of keeping track of what you own is really important. Then you can start to make decisions about the value for money you're getting in terms of the fees, in terms of the returns, in terms of the investment style that you want to bring. And the more you're disconnected, you won't know any of those things. If I ask someone, look, how much have you got in your pension pots? And they say, I've got three, one with this company, one with that company. Do you know what fees you pay? No. Do you know what your investment strategy is, whether you're active, passive? Do you know what? No. When was the last time you reviewed that in line with trying to assess whether you're going to be financially independent at a certain point? Never done it. It's almost like reading and filing statements as the degree to which they feel they're well organized. Everything's neat, but not really well structured. And I think simpler is better, because if you can simplify your pensions, and that can be done by consolidation. Now, look, there are always pros and cons. I'm not saying to people, consolidate your pensions. I'm saying, think about doing that and get some guidance on it, because some pensions are very valuable. They've got some hidden benefits. Some have got hidden charges. Some have got guaranteed annuity rates. Some have got no death benefits available to the next generation or to a spouse even. So every pension has got its own set of rules. But it's just by having a look at that, and if you can work it out for yourself, great. If not, then pay an expert to do it for you, and then you consolidated, made life simple. Now you can get on with your life. The other point I made earlier on, which is the inheritance tax point. If you've got disparate pots, somebody's got to get them together anyway. And then each trustee who runs the scheme is going to have to work out what taxes to pay to HMRC on your death. And if you don't know where they are, or even if you've got all these disparate pots, you're going to have a fortune in fees for those people to liaise with each other to work out the tax position. It's just a nightmare that's waiting to happen. And that's why I suggest simple is better than complex, generally, when it comes to looking at your finances. And let somebody take care of that. If you don't want to do it, it's fine. But make sure you're getting value for money. Make sure you're keeping a control of your fees. And that's fine. But don't have too many, because if you ask an advisor to try and put all this together, the more disparate they are, the more you're going to pay them in fees. So you might as well do that consolidation now, or look at that now, and have a conversation with somebody you trust about, should I, now I've got them all together, should I make them simpler, and what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, I agree. And it's key point, keeping things simple. And a lot of people falsely believe that complexity is in finance, complexity achieves results. But everything I see very clearly shows me that the simpler you keep your investment strategy, the simpler you keep your pensions and everything else, the better results you're going to get. And so I see that very clearly. The people who we offer on the Investment Academy, we offer people who attend the opportunity to review their pension schemes, their managed portfolios. And 9 times out of 10, they're underperforming, or they're paying super high fees. And most people don't realize that, because they think it's being managed by a so-called professional. As I said before, and which you agreed with, Kevin, nobody manages your money better than you can yourself, once you have the sort of basic tools to do that. So really worth considering that, to consolidate your pensions, making life easier for your future generations, keeping your costs down, taking control, and really having a unified investment strategy, really, because when it's in one place, you can manage it better and in a more simple way. What else can people do, Kevin, in terms of, we talked about pensions, what else should people be looking at in terms of safeguarding their assets, securing them, and really taking care of the next generation as well?
Well, I think there's basic principle of, it's exciting, isn't it? You and I get excited about building wealth, but rarely do people get excited about protecting it. They don't, inheritance tax obviously is payable on death. So that's just something that's inevitable. But for most people, that's really a long way off. But in the short run, people get ill, don't they? People get sick, people get into a position where they die early. So I would say for sure, always make sure you've made a will, always make sure you've got a powers of attorney. Very simple. They sound complicated, but they're not. A few £100 each to put a will together to protect your family. A few £100 each to make sure that if you can't make decisions for yourself, that decisions can be made, whether it's about your property, your business, or your finances, or even your health. There's been a lot of publicity, hasn't there, recently about right to live, right to survive, and so on. And it just puts health in sharper focus. Everybody knows of somebody who's been unwell. So I just think taking care of basics and recognizing that if you want to build the wealth of your family, but you're not wealthy yet, then it doesn't hurt to look at insuring yourself so that if something happens to you and you can't be the agent that builds these assets because you die prematurely or you get seriously ill, then insurance can step in and provide the wherewithal to make that happen. So that if you survive well, you build your assets. If you don't, you've got insurance to ensure that you do. And then gradually, as you build your wealth, you can remove the need for insurance. But I don't think people link the two ideas together. It's almost like I only need insurance because I get it from my work, or I only need insurance because I've got a mortgage to pay. But it's about building wealth. It's about creating that freedom, that peace of mind, that certainty in a very uncertain world. And the best way to do that is again to think about putting the basic building blocks of wills and powers of attorney in play, and then having a look at what would be the insurance needed to make sure your family were safe and you were safe should the worst happen and you don't get to the point where you're enjoying a life in your 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, great advice again. Yeah, it's sometimes, and I also echo this, Kevin. So when I making gains is glamorous, right? So making investment gains
Exactly.
is what everyone's always thinking about. But sometimes I've talked about saving fees and things like that, but also the less glamorous aspects can sometimes have as much impact on your life and for your future generations. So yeah, it's not as glamorous, but it is from a sort of monetary and sleeping well at night point of view.
Mm.
It can be even more important sometimes. And when you've got these safeguards in place, when you can sleep at night, that frees you up to make gains elsewhere with the freedom of knowing that if the worst was to happen, right, you've got, you've got your family looked after,
Yeah,
which is so important.
I agree. It's a peace of mind issue for many, and it's a peace of mind that was important to me when I was building my wealth. I don't need insurance anymore. There's no reason for it. Obviously, there are discussions about insuring inheritance tax and all those sorts of things, but it's, I think, beyond the scope of today's conversation. But nonetheless, this complexity versus simplicity point is a big one for you and I, because we've had a background, in my case, over 30 years in finance, and therefore that complexity is natural to me now. I understand so many different things about how the law works, how taxes work, how finance works, how SASs work, for example. But for the average person starting, I'd just say find something simple you can do. You don't have to do everything. Don't let things go whoosh over your head. Just choose something you can do, and ideally do something every month. A small thing, like make your will this month, or take stock of where your pensions are this month, and then do something different the next month, so that you're making small baby steps that create momentum and that you are moving, and the movement will lead you to a better decision next time. Almost the point you made earlier on, which is doing something is better than doing nothing in reality, because doing nothing means nothing will ever change. And your confidence drains, And you get to a place where increasingly you're less willing to do anything because you need to either understand everything, but just understand the one thing that you're working on. And I think that's best with a partner, a buddy, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a friend, like a running buddy or a gym buddy, somebody that you can talk to that you feel that you don't want to let them down. So you're both going to do something. And it could be your husband and wife scenario, both being on side, but often that isn't the case, I find. There's conflicts in families because they're not seeing eye to eye on different things.
Mm.
So you can do that. You could get a guide, you could get a coach, you could get a mentor, you could just join a community, and the combination of those things will hold you to account and keep you talking to people who are like-minded, as opposed to people saying, why would you do that? Just come back and do what we are doing, and what they are doing is drifting.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a powerful thing. And you talked about community, and Wealth Builders is a great place for community. I should just declare I'm a wealth coach with
Mm.
Wealth Builders, and I see this all the time when I'm talking to clients, investors. The whole community aspect, people learning from each other, is so important as having a coach, like you mentioned. And finally, I love the idea of sort of movement and momentum. And you've given us so much value today, Kevin, in terms of building that momentum. And you said something that really resonates: do something every month, which is so powerful because that enables the momentum. And you've given so much value today. That's going to help us do something for the entire new year
Hopefully.
in 2025, because there's
Yeah,
so many nuggets in this today, which I've been making notes around, new things I've learned. So I'm going to be actioning some of those things. That will keep me busy next year, I
that's
think.
fine.
Yeah.
That's good.
Uh,
Thanks for the humility of being open-minded and seeing yourself as a student to pass on the knowledge from people you're interviewing that will be useful for them, and also just to thank you on behalf of Wealth Builders for the sterling work you do. Giving back, I know you're not doing it for any kind of real financial gain. This is you wanting to give back to people, and I genuinely appreciate that and look forward to more years of working with you, whether in strategic alliances or just sharing knowledge and both being passionate about doing the right thing by people.
Absolutely. Likewise. And that's a passion we both share. So it's been a really fascinating conversation, Kevin. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot, as I've said. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about Wealth Builders or SAS or anything you're up to?
Yeah,
What's
well,
the best way?
thank you for that. The easiest way is wealthbuilders.co.uk. There's on the podcast, which is Wealth Talk. There's a plethora of information that we give for free, books for free, webinars for free. The podcast is free. I've had over 500,000 downloads now. So lots of impact we're trying to make. And little by little, people find their way to a point where the time is right for that momentum to start. So we don't mind if people go around the outside, drifting a little bit, but if they're in the right circle, they'll eventually find something, go, I can act on that. And that's really what we live for, is getting those small actions that people will take that lead to bigger actions, because wealth building is a journey of transformation, and people literally transform their own lives and the lives of others. And that's why I continue to do it despite my age, despite my wizened expression, and my sort of, when people cheekily say, why are you still doing this when you're financially independent? Because I just love the impact that I have in seeing the difference that it makes when people become financially independent. It's a whole world of control, which is important to me.
Mm.
But that freedom that you mentioned is just very powerful. So yeah, wealthbuilders.co.uk is the best place to take a look.
Great stuff. And I really urge people to have a look at that. Subscribe to the podcast and all of the other resources Kevin's mentioned, because Wealth Builders gives away a lot of good information. So I think that's a good time to wrap things up, Kevin. Really
Uh-huh.
great having this conversation with you. I really enjoyed it. And I will see you next time.
Okay, look forward to that. And thanks again for the invitation today.
Thanks, Kevin.